All right, welcome back to the best training channel on YouTube. Today is day one of a new training phase. So the previous training block that I've been on, which lasted a little over 12 weeks because I have a vacation thrown in there as well, finished up last week, was able to just kind of hit some really heavy lifts, did like a triple on a Hatfield squat at about 270. I did heavy power clean up to about 160. And then just to hit some heavy upper body lifts to kind of end that block a little bit stronger, kind of test and see where some things are at. Plus we did the flying 20 test last week, which I hit a personal best on that at a 199. And then also when I was in Texas last month, I tested a 43-inch vertical. So from that previous 3 months, maybe 4 months or so, I was able to build up to a 43-inch vert, hit a personal best on my flying 20, plus also still maintain some relatively high strength numbers, all while doing it at a lighter body weight than what I've been at for the previous few years. So I would say it was a very successful training block. But today is day one. Today's gonna look a little bit different than what it's looked like in the past, just because I am missing some equipment here. And Mondays on this new block are going to be kind of a combination of sprinting and lifting in the same day. So I thought I would kind of describe to you guys how I would put together a session if I was going to be doing some sort of sprint and a lift in the same day, because I get that question often is, can you sprint and lift in the same day? How would you program something like that? So on and so forth. So that's what I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna show you guys what we're gonna do here at the track. And then the second part of the video will be what movements I chose to do in the gym to complement what I was doing at the track today. All right, so I'm just finishing up with the last few drills for my warm up. So I'm gonna do some like choppy straight leg bounds, giant straight leg bounds, and then do some variations of cycling with the legs to get things fired up. Then go into a couple like hard 2 to 3 step accelerations, and then move into what the working sets for today's session are going to be. So the next part of this warm up, which will be the last thing I do before I get into the workout, is we're just going to do some hard accels. So 2 hard steps, 4 hard steps, 6 hard steps, probably do 1 to 2 reps on each of those, and then get into what today's workout is going to be for our track session today. So for this 2 hard steps, I'm just thinking really just hard push off of each leg. So I'm going to be taking step 1, 2, exploding through, kind of carry it out, come back, then I'll do 4 hard steps, come back, and then I'll do 6. All right, so if you remember last week when I was doing my warm-ups, I was doing a depth jump and then contrasting that with like an acceleration bound. And I really liked how it felt and how explosive I felt during the bounds. So my original plan for today was I was going to do an acceleration complex. I was going to go 3 depth jumps into a resisted acceleration bound using a sled, and then go to a 3-point stance and just do an acceleration. The problem is I don't know where the sled is. It is gone. I'm guessing the track club that trains here must have used it outside and then left it in the outside storage area, so it's not in here today, and I don't feel like going out there and getting it. So we're going to change up today a little bit, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm still going to do the depth jumps. I'm going to make them a little bit more difficult by adding a med ball to it. I was going to do it just body weight, but because I don't have that resistance on the acceleration bounds, I think I'm going to add a little bit of resistance to the depth jump, try to get a little bit more force out of those. Then I'm going to do my acceleration bound with a med ball as well. So what I'll do is hold that in the chest position, and I'm going to explode, throw the ball as I initiate that bound, and then I'll do a 3-point acceleration. The depth jumps, going to be doing sets of 3. The acceleration bound, I'm going to be doing probably 10 to 15 meters, depending on how it feels. And then my accelerations, I'll be going to 20 meters on those. So I'm gonna warm up a bit. I'm gonna start off with a 2 kilo med ball. I think I'm gonna work my way up to a 4 kilo med ball. And what I'm gonna be trying to do is when I hit the ground on that depth jump, I'm gonna try to explode and throw that ball up over my head. Not literally throw it, but like go from the chest position into an overhead position as I make my landing onto the box. So it should look something like this. And then we'll do a medicine ball acceleration bound. All right, you really gotta chase that med ball down or that thing's gonna go all the way down the track. And the last little one of the warm up here, just gonna start off with a 10 meter acceleration. I don't know if I'm gonna keep the med ball in for the acceleration bounds. I might just end up doing depth jumps into accelerations because that bound isn't serving a purpose, I think, with this specific complex. A resisted bound would make more sense to throw that into something like this, but really when you're doing an acceleration bound without resistance, even with that med ball there, all you're really doing is kind of slowing down the mechanics of the acceleration. So going from something very explosive to something that's intentionally not as fast as a regular acceleration, and then going into an acceleration, I think is throwing that off a little bit. So I think I'm just gonna do 3 sets of 3 sets of a 20 meter acceleration, and play around with it from there. All right, so I definitely like the feeling of the acceleration following the depth jumps. I think that acceleration bound in between wasn't giving me the feeling that I thought it was gonna give me. So I based this complex off of the free speed training that I did for Discord. There's an acceleration complex in there where I go from a very heavy sled acceleration bound into an unresisted acceleration bound, and then into an acceleration. And the thought on that is the heavy sled is going to force you to produce high force to be able to move that sled. And by doing an acceleration bound, you're kind of exaggerating the motion of an acceleration. Then you remove the resistance, and you should be able to apply that force at greater velocities. So be able to take that same movement pattern, so go from a resisted acceleration bound into an acceleration bound, and be able to apply that force while still kind of exaggerating the motion of acceleration. And then you want to try to maximize the amount of velocity that you can apply that force at. So it's high force at a faster velocity, fastest velocity you can produce that force at, mimicking all of those same kind of angles. So the idea from today was like you have a high force movement with the depth jump, and then you've got a higher force, higher velocity with the acceleration bound, and then you go into whatever your highest velocity movement is going to be for that complex, which would be the unresisted acceleration. But I think what was happening is that acceleration bound and the depth jumps are too closely mimicked in terms of the amount of force and velocity that you're getting off of a depth jump versus the amount of force at the velocity you're getting at the acceleration bound, that I don't think it was actually doing much to pair those two together. So I'm just gonna stick with the depth jump, go into the acceleration, and then maybe add another repetition on because I'm taking out all of those reps of the acceleration bound that I thought I was gonna do today. I also decided to throw in extra reps on that depth jump there. I feel like sets of 5 is good. So I figured it out. I'm gonna do 5 depth jumps and then go into an acceleration at 20 meters. So this is the reason why for those that follow along with the subscription program, you're always going to be a week or two behind me, because sometimes I have something in my mind that I think is going to be fantastic. I go out and I try it, I end up not liking it, and I need to adjust it before I send it out to you guys. So that's exactly what happened today. So I'm going to do probably a couple more sets of 5 depth jumps into an acceleration, and then go into the weight room and do my lifting session for today. The only problem is today my daughter doesn't have daycare, so I need to be able to go get this session finished and then go pick her up. So I'm going to be filming tomorrow the lifting session that I would have been doing today, but I want to make it into one video because next week on Monday when I do this same session, it's all going to be in a single session. So I'm going to knock out a couple more reps of this, but the next thing you guys are going to see is me in the weight room pairing together some exercises in there that I would be doing on an acceleration day. All right, so change of plans again. My daughter got invited to go on a play date with one of her friends, which just freed up an extra couple hours for me. So I'm actually able to get done my Monday today the way that I wanted to. So from the track into the gym, what I'm going to be focusing on in the gym is mimicking some of the same angles in terms of hip flexion and knee flexion that I would see during like early acceleration, and then also trying to mimic some of the same components of developing that first kind of step explosiveness when we're talking about trying to develop that acceleration. So what I'm doing in the weight room today is I wrote this down on the program as deep squat variation. So anything that's going to be a full range of motion squat is going to be more similar towards acceleration than, let's say, max velocity. Because in acceleration, you're in that 3-point stance, you're driving that knee up, you're trying to strike the ground behind you and push. So you're getting into very deep flexion positions and trying to explode through extension at the knee and the hip at the same time. So a deep squat variation is going to help develop strength in those positions. And then I'm going to pair this with a seated box jump because I want to go from a static position and explode through it as quickly as I possibly can, similar to what you would see when you're in a 3-point stance or a 2-point stance or coming out of the blocks, whatever it is. You're always going to be in that static position and then try to explode out of that position as quickly as possible. So we're going to build up to something that's kind of like moderate today. I chose to do back squats because I haven't done squats in a very long time, or I shouldn't say squats. I haven't done barbell back squats in a very long time. I've done a lot of hat-filled variations over the last few months. So I don't want to go super heavy on this and just pay for it for the next 3-4 days. So I'm going to do somewhere between 4 to 5 reps on the back squat, again at like a moderate weight, and then I'm going to do about half of those reps on a seated box jump, so no more than 3. If I end up doing 4 reps on the back squat, then I'll do 2s. If I do 5 reps on the back squat, then I'll do 3s, but I'll go from back squat into a seated box jump variation. And what I really want to focus on in this seated squat position is try to be at 90 or maybe slightly above 90, because you want to, like I said, we're trying to work on that explosiveness from a static position. So when I'm in my 3-point stance, let's say I've got one foot in front, other one back, I get down to that position. I'm not really at 90 degrees right here with this front leg. I'm actually a little bit more open than 90 degrees. So being a little bit deeper than that position is going to be okay if you need to be a little bit shallow, but try to be somewhere around or slightly above 90 degrees. And then from this position, seated position, just going to explode up onto a box. Now, the question I often get with box jumps from a seated position is sometimes I'll pick my feet up and kind of rock into it, or sometimes I'll keep my feet static and just kind of explode through. I don't really care what variation you choose to do when doing these, as long as you're putting maximum amount of effort within each one of these jumps, because essentially you're still going from a static position and exploding through. Even if you're kind of rocking up and going through, that's obviously, it's not as static as just standing here and trying to explode through. But really the focus is just trying to get into a specific angle and explode out of that angle as quickly as you can. So I'm gonna knock out some warm-up sets, build up to something that I think is gonna be moderate today on the back squats, and then knock out anywhere between 3 to 4 sets on this. I think 4 would be the high end, but minimum 3 reps or 3 sets on this, and depending on how that feels, maybe do a 4th one. All right, I did my first set at 145. I think 145 is where I'm gonna stay at today. If I go too heavy, I feel like I'm gonna pay the price and be very sore later on, especially for the next couple days. I have a max velocity session that I wanna do on Wednesday, so I think I would be struggling to get through that if I push this back squat too heavy. So this is definitely more on the moderate side in terms of load. So we'll do 3 total sets. So 2 more sets on the back squat of 5 reps on that. And then I'm gonna do 3 repetitions on a seated box jump. So I got 2 sets left on this. 145 is definitely a moderate weight. So if I'm gonna be a little bit more moderate on the load, I'm gonna try to move that load with a lot more intensity. And then pair that up with my jumps. 3 reps here, 80 centimeters on the box. One more set, and then I'm gonna move on to what my second complex for the day is gonna be. All right, and then the last thing I'm gonna do today is a hip bridge into a broad jump. And the reason I wanna do this is because back squat for me is a very quad dominant movement. I am a very quad dominant squatter. The seated box jump is also a more quad dominated movement. So now the second part of like trying to develop aspects of acceleration is acceleration, and the positions that you hit in acceleration are going to be determined on whether or not you are able to reach full hip extension. Knee extension is a byproduct of the hip extending when we're talking about acceleration. So you push through your hip and then you end up extending through the knee and through the ankle. The hip is what is going to drive that movement. Like this, bringing the knee up and driving that knee down is all gonna be from the hip. So a loaded hip dominant movement into a hip dominant jumping variation. So in that broad jump, you're gonna have to get a very big hinge at the waist and explode through. So I'm kind of over exaggerating that flexion at the hip that I would see if I were comparing it to an acceleration. And then I'm trying to explode through the hip and keep that momentum going so I can get as far out on that broad jump as I possibly can. So again, 3 sets of this. Probably stick with the same rep scheme that I did for the squats and the box jump. So 5 reps on this, 3 reps on the broad jump. And then for me today, this is gonna be the end of today's session because I have already accumulated a lot of volume throughout the track workout. I've accumulated volume into the weight room. So that's the biggest thing that you need to monitor if you are going to be doing sprints and lifting in the same day. You got to keep track of 2 things. 1, focus the majority of that session on what you want to improve the most. So for me, I care more about the sprinting than I do the specific numbers on my lifts. There's no like specific thing in the weight room that I'm trying to progress on right now. So I would focus more of my attention and more of my volume overall on the sprinting aspect. And then in the weight room, I'm doing enough to still stimulate, but keep that below that kind of level of fatigue where I think it's going to end up deteriorating from other days throughout the week. So 3 sets on a back squat isn't a whole lot. 3 sets on the hip bridge isn't a whole lot. pair that up with the jumping. Overall, if I were to do just this session in the weight room, I'd probably do 4 to 5 sets on each of these movements and probably have a third complex that I would want to do. But because I have the sprinting in here as well, there's no need to kind of just full on annihilate myself in a single day. So focus your attention on whatever it is that you want to improve the most, and then use that second part as just ways to kind of bring up qualities that you're looking for whatever that main focus is. All right, so there you have it. That is how I would design a day if I were going to be doing sprinting and lifting in the same session. Figure out what your priority is going to be. Maintain the majority of the volume and intensity on that priority. Whatever the secondary aspect of that day is going to be for you, make sure you're doing enough to gain some sort of stimulation that's going to push an adaptation towards qualities that you're looking to see. Monitor the overall amount of fatigue that you're going to accumulate on that day so it's not negatively affecting following days from that session within a single week. And then have fun with it. Explore, play around with things. Like I showed you guys today, I thought I was going to be doing depth jumps into Excel bounds, into this and that. I ended up changing it up to where I was just doing depth jumps and doing accelerations. The sled didn't happen to be there when I thought it was going to be there. So you just got to kind of roll the punches, have fun with it, enjoy the flow, and get some gains. So that's going to be it for today. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you in the next one.